sometimes I have an epiphany. I'll be doing a video or reading a book or watching a TV show or movie or just, spacing off as I'm doing my job, whatever, and something will crop up. And I know this is probably a topic that's been bannered around a few times over the years on various social media platforms. But, you know, I grew up with a father who was my stepfather. He was a veteran of Korea, was a retired sergeant from the Marine Corps. He was 20 years older than my mother. We lived in a small community on the outskirts of a small town on a small acreage. He was always gruff, always seemed angry. I was scared more often than not to even deal with him unless absolutely. It just wasn't until I got into my older years. A lot of similarity to Mr. Lars here. Oh, Owen Lars, not Bo Lars, because I confused Bo. That'd be Owen's father. Suddenly, he gets married as a young man to a young woman, and he's going to inherit his father's farm. He discovers that for one reason or another, they just can't have children of their own. It's speculated or implied that there was some reasons, so that's why they never had any children, that Luke never had any siblings growing up, etc. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this strange wanderer, which Owen probably was savvy enough to recognize as a possible Jedi, brings some infant to him, and his wife asks them to foster this infant, and probably doesn't give him a whole lot of information. This is one of those parts of the canon or legends that they don't spend much time on. We get a brief glimpse of him holding the baby as Obi-Wan wanders off into the desert to become a hermit. Yet I have to suspect Owens is a worldly enough man or smart enough man to piece together the pieces. He's going to be aware of Anakin Skywalker, especially since Anakin was the son of his stepmother, who short life, etc., and so on. He's going to have suspicions. Now, it's never established, although it's talked about in a number of novels and once or twice in the Clone Wars, and we see implications and outright confirmations in the Mandalorian series, which ironically I have not seen the entire series. I just get to see the bits and pieces that show up on YouTube because I can't afford that channel anyway. The point I'm trying to get at is Owen Lars most likely should have been told, if not had a conversation with Obi-Wan, if not at the time, at some point later in life, that Luke Skywalker is a prodigy son of a Jedi, and that likelihood of Force latent abilities are going to manifest themselves. I find it highly questionable that they just suddenly show up when he's 20 and Obi-Wan comes out of the woodwork and starts teaching him a few basic tricks, and then Yoda really gets on board with giving him the full crash course in becoming a Jedi. It's kind of, if you look at Anakin's life, how he had a natural talent for speed, for piloting at his youth and his young age. Luke shows those attributes as well. It's talked about the T-16 that he busted up. He had a reputation for being a daredevil pilot and flyer. He was so experienced in piloting sub-atmospheric or atmospheric craft that it was very quick crash course, if none at all, that he just suddenly leaps into an X-Wing and takes off. With almost no training. I suspect that there was a crash course there off scene. There's a lot of stuff that would go down in the Star Wars universe, just like the real universe. It's just not going to be cinematically possible to include it. Or, it might have been touched on in the novel had the novel been written before the movie. If you've ever read Star Wars A New Hope, or The Empire Strikes Back, or Return of the Jedi, those three novels are verbatim what the movie says and does. There's no divergence. There's no poetic copyright and poetic license. I'm just saying the obvious. So Owen in later years, and Owen in Luke's later years, when Luke starts expressing the desire to follow his friends off world to join the academy, and as I will point out, that is the Imperial Academy, where he wants to become a pilot, probably a TIE fighter pilot, because that would be where all the fame and glory and the excitement would be, as opposed to, say, a freighter pilot or a cargo transport pilot or a shuttle pilot or what have you. So the fact is that Luke is now pushing to get off the world and go into the big galaxy, the big universe as a whole, and join the Imperial forces as a pilot. Owen has to have known some point that Luke had Jedi tendencies. He's probably had him and Beru had to have dealt with an adolescent Luke showing or displaying some sort of strange abilities or some strange occurrences happening on the farm. Probably a good reason why Luke was raised up on a moisture farm as far away from the major city populations as possible, because the least likely to attract attention from him doing something that theoretically, or things happening around him that should be not possible, that might be considered magical or mysterious. And those who remember the Jedi, because we're in an era, those first 10 years or so of Luke's life, the Empire is a hierarchy of the Emperor is actively eradicating anything good about the Jedi and Jedi talents and the Force. They don't want them to be popularized anymore. They want them to be villains, because that's how the victors write the history books. Just keep that in mind. So if Owen Lars had knowledge, and it would be in his character to want to protect Luke, and having raised Luke as a son, not as a stepson, but as a son, his gruff mannerisms have a purpose and a point. Sometimes as the father, as the mature figure, as the older advisor, we have to coach our children, sometimes in stern methods and methodology, to protect them from themselves and from the greater world, but more importantly, to get them to help them, guide them to make the better choice. Maybe not perhaps the best choice or the good choice as we would see it, but the better choice for giving them a possible future. How many parents, how many fathers and mothers out there have had to pull in the reins on their son or daughter who has this vision of running off to Hollywood to be an actor or actress, or going up to the oil fields because their buddy works there now and is making $50,000 a year, and forcing them to go to the college, to go to the university, to follow the career track that at least gives them options. I was watching a Netflix series yesterday on Garth Brooks, and he was talking about his own father. This is what came into my mind. His father made him find an alternate path. He didn't stand in the way of him becoming what he wanted to do or pursuing what he wanted to do, but he insisted on Garth at least spending enough time to go to college to get a taste for it, to acquire some kind of skill set that would provide for him and whatever potentially would come along if his dream fell through. So in this case, Owen Lars must understand the implications of what potential Luke would have. He may not grasp the sheer implications of a Jedi Knight Luke, but he most certainly have seen and witnessed the angst and brief encounters with Anakin and the STD, or not STD, SDD, or whatever they call it. It's suggested that after the Clone Wars and the fall of the Jedi, that Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ben Kenobi, has a bit of PST. Oh, he's shell shocked. He's got some issues. So Owen is trying to protect Luke from this, but he's also trying to protect the galaxy from what Luke potentially could become if Owen actually allows himself to view things in that nature. So when I think of the tragedy that is Owen and Beru's life at the end, they die protecting Luke. They most certainly did not give up any information on Luke. This is why they were barbecued. This is why the stormtroopers butchered them, because they, under intense torture, they refused, and crude torture at that, they refused to divulge where Luke was. We never see that. We just see their dead bodies and Luke's reaction. We don't know what and how far they went to protect Luke. So I have to look back at the 20 years that 20 years of Luke's life when he lived with them, and how much effort Owen and Beru would have put into creating the courageous, intelligent, empathetic young man that Luke was and is at the beginning of A New Hope, as well as finding some way to channel those latent force abilities when they do come up, because they don't have the knowledge to train him or teach him how to protect. If you look at the Jedi code, the Jedi methodology themselves, perhaps not their code, is their choice is to find latent force ability infants. They find the younglings as young as possible, to spend their entire formative years being coached and counseled and shown and directed in a positive, as much of a positive way as possible within the Jedi Order, to become the best Jedi Knights they can be, and that they actually have a farming out process. So if the Jedi, if the would-be youngling has tendencies that just are not going to be acceptable or are dangerous to encourage continued development, they can farm them out to some other agencies, like their farming program that they have. Just like if the would-be Jedi potential is too weak to be important or to be resilient enough to endure the negative side of dealing with being to being a Jedi. So this is where we see the opportunities to go into cartography or into the library branch of knowledge and education, into foreign relations and the outreach programs for health and agriculture and so on and so forth. All great ideas. But this is from a Jedi institution that has a vast well of knowledge and resources and trainers and et cetera and so on to fall back on. What did Owen and Beru have? Nothing. So they had to do what they could do the best they could. And I suppose there's more than a reason why Owen considers Ben Kenobi a shiftless rogue or somebody that Luke should avoid at all costs, is in part because Ben Kenobi went off into the desert, but he didn't disappear. He was always loitering around, and certain times would come back, maybe at critical moments in Luke's development, to help guide the youth to make a good decision, and maybe perhaps in not such a manner that he remembers, because as we know, the Force users have an ability to make you forget things. So it's possible Ben's been in and out, and he's either used those Jedi mind tricks on Owen and Beru to the point where Owen is utterly, instantly suspicious of even the mention of Ben's name, or knowingly aided them and given them a little bit of information or advice as to what to do when a 2-year-old Luke starts whipping things around his room in a tantrum, or out of excitement accidentally flips a land speeder over when he's 10 without being anywhere near it. How would you explain something like that to your how would you explain that sort of thing to people who are not in your immediate circle? And you're going out of your way to hide Luke's presence to protect him from what the evil elements of the Empire, of Palatine's inner circle of hands and agents and so on and so forth, who are actively looking for, former Jedi, would-be Jedi, anybody that shows any kind of talents for Jedi ability. They're going to want to be recruited and either trained in the dark ways of the Jedi or the Sith and utilized in some manner, or destroyed. There's what a fine balance that this couple had to walk for 20 years, and then how the tragedy of their life ends, It's bad enough that they got an existence in a very hostile environment in a very remote area that they can only depend on themselves for the most part. They have a son that's not truly their son, but is a nephew, and then there's her step nephew, however you want to look at it. Then there's the loss of the stepmother, Anakin's mother, Anakin's early appearance a couple times in his actions on Tatooine, probably rumors of it filtering back to later to Owen's ears. And like I said, Owen is a farmer and a fairly intelligent man. He's not presented as an idiot or an oaf, even though he's briefly seen in the movies or in the books. We don't see a whole lot of stuff on the internet about this particular man and this particular woman who were the de facto parents of Luke Skywalker raised up. It's like we don't see the same story from Leia Organa. We don't see how her step parents raised her and the environment she was raised in. I think those would be interesting things to deal and to delve into for somebody who's much more articulated than I. Just a thought. So, tell you, sometimes these epiphanies can be a pain in the butt. And yes, this was fired from the hip. Y'all have a good weekend.